I'm tired of losing my friends and my friends getting hurt. I don't know about you guys. I hope you got a lot of consideration for other competitors instead of a lot of balls and no brains. We don't need that in this sport.
Rusty and I, we just butted heads a lot, and you know, I didn't have a lot of respect for him. I feel like he cheap shotted me quite a few times, took some wins away, and you know, I'm sure I probably bumped him. I think I knocked him off the racetrack a couple of times in the road courses, and so there was a lot of animosity between us. And then
they still replay that Talladega crash like a warning. 1993, last lap chaos. Rusty Wallace gets hooked. The car snaps sideways, lifts off the ground, and spins through the air while the crowd erupts in a mix of shock and anger. In the infield care center, Wallace tried to stand while his body was still shaking. Dale Earnhardt walked in later with the same calm face he always had after a storm. Wallace never forgot that moment. Not the hit, not the silence, not the way the sport tried to pretend it was just another accident. Rusty Wallace came from a world where respect had a cost. If someone moved you, you moved them back. If someone crossed a line, you let them know. NASCAR, in the late 80s and early 90s, was a battlefield of elbows, bumpers, and pride. Wallace carried all of it inside him. He never hid his anger. He never softened a message. When he believed someone wronged him, the entire garage heard about it. He did not keep a long list. He kept a short one. Only the men who truly got under his skin. The men who forced him to fight harder, dig deeper, and sometimes lose control. The men he believed crossed him on the track or challenged him off it. The kind of rivals who shaped careers and rewrote reputations. At 78, Rusty Wallace no longer cares about smoothing the past. He tells the truth the way he lived it. Direct, sharp, uncomfortable. The 5 drivers he hated the most are not surprises to anyone who watched him race. But the reasons run deeper than fans ever heard. Before we start counting them down, we need to remember who Rusty Wallace truly was. Rusty Wallace was born in 1956 in Fenton, Missouri, a place where racing was not a hobby, but a way of life. His father, Russ Wallace, ran cars on short tracks across the Midwest, and Rusty grew up breathing the smell of fuel and metal long before he understood what speed could do to a man. By his teenage years, he was already beating grown drivers, with nothing more than raw instinct and the kind of confidence that came from surviving rough Saturday nights on small bullrings. He entered the NASCAR Cup Series in the early 1980s, with a reputation that followed him everywhere. Tough, sharp, aggressive, a driver who did not wait for chances, but created them with his front bumper. In a garage filled with loud personalities, Wallace stood out because he did not need to shout. His driving spoke for him. When he wanted a lane, he took it. When he wanted respect, he earned it, with results, not promises. 1993 changed everything. That was the year Wallace became Cup Series champion, the season that confirmed he belonged among the giants of his era. But it was also the period when tensions with other stars began to boil. Earnhardt, Waltrip, Gordon Jarrett, and later Stewart. Every decade brought a new enemy, a new test, a new line crossed on a track that rewarded courage and punished hesitation. Wallace never pretended to be calm. He drove on emotion. He reacted fast. He pushed back. That honesty created loyalty among some fans and lifelong friction with certain drivers who felt the sting of his words or the force of his car. To understand the list he is about to reveal, you must understand that Rusty Wallace always believed rivalry was part of greatness. It pushed him. It shaped him. It defined him long before trophies ever did. And now, after a lifetime of battles, he can finally speak without holding anything back. Number 5. Dale Earnhardt, SR. Rusty Wallace and Dale Earnhardt never needed microphones to build a rivalry. The track did it for them. Every fan who lived through the early 1990s remembers the feeling when the black number 3 sat behind the blue Miller genuine draft car. Earnhardt did not wait. He tested you, moved you, and forced you to decide whether you wanted to be pushed around or pushed back. Wallace understood the game, but never accepted the rules. That is why their tension never faded. Talladega, 1993, was the moment the entire country saw the truth. Wallace went airborne after contact from behind. The car spun high enough for fans to see the bottom of the chassis, then slammed the ground with a violence that made the grandstands go silent. The officials reviewed it. Earnhardt said little. Wallace said exactly what he felt. He did not accuse. He did not soften. He simply said he did not appreciate being turned at 200 miles per hour. The rivalry sharpened instantly. Their clashes were not limited to superspeedways. Bristol became a battleground where positions were taken, not given. Wallace won there with a level of precision only he understood, but Earnhardt always found a way to insert himself into the night. They touched. They traded lanes. They traded stares after the races. Respect existed, but it came wrapped in frustration that burned deeper each season. Wallace believed Earnhardt crossed lines because he thought he could control the room. Earnhardt believed Wallace complained too much about the cost of hard racing. That difference in philosophy created a divide no handshake could fully erase. Wallace never forgot how it felt to be sent spinning at full speed. Earnhardt never forgot that Wallace was one of the few drivers who pushed back without fear. Their rivalry built two legends and still divides fans today. For Wallace, the memory remained sharp. It was never about the crash. It was about the message behind it. Number 4. Jeff Gordon. Jeff Gordon did not just enter NASCAR, he disrupted it. When he arrived in the early 1990s with a clean look, a polished media presence, and a driving style built on precision instead of intimidation, he represented everything Rusty Wallace believed the sport was moving away from. Wallace came from the rough short tracks of the Midwest. Gordon came from a world of national spotlight, rapid sponsorship growth, and a new generation of fans who barely recognized the old guard. That difference alone created pressure. Contact on the track made it personal. Bristol became their proving ground. 1997 stands out even now. Wallace controlled the night with his usual rhythm, driving deep into the corners and sliding the rear just enough to seal the exit. But Gordon kept appearing in the mirror inch by inch, lap by lap, as if he had memorized every line Wallace preferred. The first bump was light, the second had intention. The third made Wallace snap on the radio. To Wallace, Gordon was not paying dues. He was taking advantage of a moment when the sport wanted change more than conflict. Their rivalry grew through Martinsville and Richmond. Wallace ran those tracks with the grit of a man who learned to win on bullrings, where a mistake meant a broken car and a long tow home. Gordon ran them like a surgeon. He waited, protected his equipment, and struck when Wallace least expected it. Wallace hated that combination. It felt calculated. It felt engineered. It felt like the sport was shifting toward drivers who mastered systems instead of chaos. Each time Gordon passed him clean, Wallace felt a different kind of challenge. Gordon proved that precision could beat aggression. Wallace did not accept that easily. What pushed Wallace the most was how quickly Gordon became the face of NASCAR. Sponsors lined up. Television cameras followed. Fans argued that the sport belonged to a new generation. Wallace saw it as a reminder that the world he fought to dominate was no longer built for men like him. Gordon was not a rival by personality. He was a rival by evolution. Every win Gordon collected reinforced the idea that Wallace was defending territory that was changing beneath his feet. Gordon never attacked Wallace in interviews. He never insulted him. He never needed to. Their conflict lived in the quiet moments after restarts, in the tension of two styles fighting for control of the same corner. Wallace never hated Gordon for who he was. He hated what Gordon represented. Number 3. Darrell Waltrip. Rusty Wallace and Darrell Waltrip were never meant to get along. They entered NASCAR from different worlds, carrying different beliefs about what it meant to race and what it meant to win. Waltrip came from the loud era of self-promotion interviews, packed with sharp one-liners and a confidence that bordered on provocation. Wallace came from the Midwest short tracks, where talking big meant nothing until you backed it up on the next lap. That clash of personalities set the stage long before their cars ever touched. In the early 1980s, Waltrip was already a champion with a polished image and a reputation for controlling the garage with his voice. Wallace arrived younger, hungrier, and far less interested in the politics that ruled the sport. He did not care for games played in the press. He cared for the battles happening at 200 miles per hour. When Waltrip made remarks about aggressive newcomers, Wallace knew exactly who the message targeted. Waltrip saw Wallace as a driver who needed to be taught how the Cup Series worked. Wallace saw Waltrip as a man who expected respect without earning it from him. Their tension became visible at short tracks like Martinsville, Bristol, and North Wilkesboro. Waltrip had mastered those places for years, but Wallace attacked them with a more forceful rhythm. When Wallace moved Waltrip for position, Waltrip took it personally. When Waltrip returned the favor, Wallace confronted him. They raced as if each lap was a negotiation of pride, neither willing to give an inch because giving an inch meant admitting the other man held leverage. The broadcast booth later softened Waltrip's image, but Wallace never forgot the competitor who stood across from him in the 80s. Waltrip knew how to work cameras. He knew how to twist a narrative until fans believed him. Wallace hated that skill. He did not trust someone who could win arguments without turning a single lap. Waltrip knew exactly how to get under his skin, and Wallace reacted every time. That reaction kept the rivalry alive for years. Even after both men earned their championships and moved on from the peak of their battles, the friction never dissolved. They could smile for photos. They could share stories, but the weight of their early clashes always lingered in the room. Wallace believed Waltrip represented an era where words mattered more than actions. Waltrip believed Wallace represented a threat to a hierarchy he spent years building. To Wallace, the problem was simple. Waltrip talked too much and raced too hard to be ignored. Number 2. Tony Stewart. Tony Stewart entered NASCAR like a firestorm. He was young, fearless, and unwilling to yield to anyone, especially veterans who believed they had earned the right to control the tone of the garage. Rusty Wallace saw pieces of himself in Stewart, but those similarities only made the rivalry sharper. Stewart raced with emotion. Wallace raced with intensity. When those two forces met on short tracks and road courses, the results were inevitable. Their first clashes were not misunderstandings. They were warnings. Stewart drove with a level of force that reminded Wallace of the old days, but with even less patience. Wallace could handle aggression. He built a career on it. What he could not tolerate was the sense that Stewart did not care who he hit or how long the consequences lasted. Stewart demanded space and respect instantly. Wallace believed a veteran deserved that first. The conflict grew from pride, not personalities. Watkins Glen became one of their hottest battlegrounds. Stewart ran the road courses like a man trying to prove something every lap. Wallace attacked them like a craftsman who learned their rhythm over years. When Stewart shoved his way through corners, Wallace felt disrespected. Road courses were his domain. Stewart treated them like short tracks with tighter walls. Wallace snapped over the radio more than once, calling out Stewart's impatience, accusing him of turning every race into a fight. Short tracks created even more heat. Bristol and Richmond exposed their differences with brutal clarity. Stewart braked late and launched off corners with pure aggression. Wallace protected position with the precision of a champion. When they made contact, Wallace saw it as reckless. Stewart saw it as racing. The gap between those interpretations made their tension impossible to settle. What truly bothered Wallace was not a single accident or a single exchange. It was the feeling that Stewart did not fear the veterans who built NASCAR's foundation. Wallace wanted young drivers to earn their place. Stewart wanted to take his. That friction turned into anger, on pit road and interviews, and in the garage area where neither man ever backed down. Wallace respected Stewart's talent. He hated the way Stewart forced him into battles he did not want but refused to avoid. Their rivalry did not need words. It lived in the corners where both men refused to lift. Stewart pushed hard, and Wallace took it personally. Number 1. Dale Jarrett. Among all the drivers, Rusty Wallace clashed with the name that cut deepest was not the one fans expected. It was Dale Jarrett. He was not loud like Dale Earnhardt. He was not explosive like Tony Stewart. What Jarrett brought was something Wallace hated far more than a hard shove. He brought precision. He brought discipline. He brought the kind of clean racing that trapped Wallace in a cage without ever touching him. That quiet control is what pushed Jarrett to the very top of Wallace's list. Jarrett defended positions with a patience that frustrated Wallace more than any wreck. Wallace thrived on rhythm and aggression. If he wanted a lane, he took it. If someone challenged him, he pushed back. Jarrett broke that rhythm. He held lines with absolute consistency. He left no gaps, no mistakes, no late corner openings for Wallace to exploit. It felt surgical. It felt intentional. It felt like Jarrett knew exactly how to dismantle Wallace's momentum without ever leaving a scratch on either car. Tracks like Martinsville made their contrast impossible to ignore. Wallace carried years of short-track instinct. He attacked corners with confidence built from growing up on Midwest bull rings. But Jarrett countered every move. When Wallace dipped low, Jarrett cut the entry. When Wallace tried the outside, Jarrett backed up the corner and blocked the exit. It was not contact that stopped Wallace. It was Jarrett's refusal to blink. After long green flag runs, Wallace often climbed from the car, furious not because he was hit but because he felt completely shut down by someone who never raced dirty. Jarrett also represented a style of racing Wallace never fully embraced. Clean, conservative, predictable. Wallace respected toughness, and toughness to him meant physical battles and emotional fire. Jarrett showed toughness in a different form. He won by refusing to give anything away. Wallace viewed that as a challenge to his entire identity behind the wheel. When a driver could frustrate him without touching him, it felt like a deeper loss. What pushed Jarrett to number one was simple. He forced Wallace to work harder than anyone else. He forced Wallace to change lines, change strategies, and sometimes overdrive the car. Wallace could deal with being hit. He could deal with trash talk. What he could not stand was being outmaneuvered by someone who stayed quiet and perfect for 500 miles. Jarrett never wrecked Wallace to beat him. He just made Wallace beat himself. Rusty Wallace never viewed crew chiefs the same way he viewed drivers. Drivers fought him on the track. Crew chiefs fought him with strategy, timing, and decisions that shaped the entire rhythm of a race. Among all of them, Robin Pemberton was the one who pushed Wallace to the edge more than anyone else. Their partnership produced wind speed and some of Wallace's best seasons. It also produced arguments so heated that people in the garage still talk about them decades later. Pemberton was brilliant. Wallace never denied that. He understood setups at a level Wallace respected. He knew how to read a race, when to pit, when to gamble, and when to pull Wallace back from a strategy that would burn the tires or kill track position. But brilliance comes with stubbornness, and Pemberton had his share. Wallace was emotional, reactive, and driven entirely by what he felt inside the car. Pemberton relied on numbers, data, and a calm logic that ignored the heat of the moment. When those two philosophies collided over the radio, it sounded like lightning hitting metal. Their arguments were not mild disagreements. They were full-scale confrontations about wedge adjustments, air pressure, or fuel strategy. Wallace would demand changes. Pemberton would refuse. Wallace wanted the car freed up. Pemberton insisted it would destroy the long run. Wallace wanted track position at all costs. Pemberton believed the race would come back to them if they stayed disciplined. Neither man backed down easily. The crew often stood by silently, waiting to see which voice would win that particular fight. Some of their biggest tension came during races when Wallace felt the setup slipping away. Pemberton would tell him the data looked fine or that other cars were falling off just as hard. Wallace would fire back that he was the one driving, not the computers. Those moments created friction that lasted long after the checkered flag. Wallace hated the feeling of being trapped in a car that did not respond the way he wanted. He hated even more the feeling that someone was telling him to accept it. Yet, underneath all the volatility was a strange truth. Wallace worked with Pemberton because he knew the man could match his intensity. Pemberton was not afraid of him. He did not fold when Wallace erupted on the radio. He did not hesitate to challenge him. That defiance made Wallace furious in the moment and loyal in the long term. Pemberton did not beat Wallace on the track. He beat him in the conversations that shaped the track. Rusty Wallace never tried to hide who he was. He came from a world where respect was earned with bruises late breaking and the courage to hold a line when the car shook beneath you. The men on his list were not random names. They were the drivers who forced him to confront the limits of his own control. Some beat him with force. Some beat him with precision. Some beat him by refusing to give anything away. Each one left a mark that stayed long after the trophies were lifted and the crowds went home. What Wallace revealed at 78 is not bitterness. It is honesty shaped by decades of pressure, adrenaline, and moments when careers turned in a single corner. He did not hate these men for who they were. He hated the way they challenged him, exposed him, and made him respond in ways he could not hide. Even now, when the fires of competition have cooled, he remembers every moment with clarity. A driver never forgets the men who pushed him hardest. In a sport built on noise and impact, Wallace stood out because he gave everything of himself every time he strapped into a car. That intensity created enemies and earned respect in equal measure. The rivalries that once defined his nights now define his legacy, not as a driver who avoided conflict, but as one who faced it without looking away. Rusty Wallace did not run from his past, he named it. And in NASCAR, that kind of truth lasts longer than any checkered flag.